I want to get your general reaction to what I've been calling this mass genocidal psychosis that's going on in the West right now. We're in another era, which is very common, where there's bipartisan consensus, where dissent is not allowed. You see these. This is very common in Washington, despite what the media say. Where Washington always fight. No, it's very common that they make these consensus on issues, mostly foreign affairs, and when they do, the consequences of that is often very tragic for the working class and the global community. So I want to get your general thoughts on the slaughter we've been seeing, the historical slaughter. We just showed that clip uh, of this lady justifying killing a Palestinian teenager for showing emotions. I want you guys to understand this is a historic slaughter we are seeing. More kids have been killed in Gaza, 2.5 times more kids than the entirety of all the war zones combined last year, including Ukraine. So, Glenn, before we get started, and then CJ, I'll let you have the next question. Before you get started, I want to
Yeah,
get your general
absolutely, absolutely. Go ahead.
on this consensus, this insane genocidal psychosis we see in the Western media in Washington, D.C., if you want to take that on, Glenn.
Yeah, I think to me, it's the most important point is that, to be an American, to be an American citizen, an American journalist, an American commentator, obviously means you're going to be spending a lot of your time focused on wars because the United States, if it does nothing else, fights wars continuously. I've lived in Brazil for 18 years. And one of the things that one day I kind of woke up and realized was, hey, you know what? Most countries actually don't go around in their media and in their government talking about which country they want to bomb next. It would be like a very strange thing to just openly start talking about which government you want to overthrow, which country you want to invade, which country you want to bomb. In Brazil, I mean, I don't know the last time Brazil has done that. Most countries, China, and yet in the United States, it's just so customary. I mean, you can barely remember, even in your own lifetime, all the wars, all the coups. But so on the one hand, it's always the case that whenever you look at war is by far the worst thing humanity can do to itself. It unleashes all of our worst, lowest, most barbaric and savage instincts. We have to dehumanize the other side by definition to accept state of war. People who kill each other have to suffocate their empathy and their compassion by dehumanizing. So it's in every case absolutely horrific. But it was clear to me from the very beginning, from the very first day after the Hamas attack on October 7th, that this war was going to be different, not just by degree, but in kind, in part because the nature of the Hamas attack and the way it was talked about almost ensured that the Israeli government had talked itself into and had talked its population into the need not just to go and seek vengeance, but that this had been essentially the equivalent of the Holocaust, which for Jews worldwide is the North Star of aggression and victimization. And when you talk yourself into that instantaneously, of course, the things you're going to convince yourself that you're now entitled to do are basically limitless. But at the same time, the nature of the Israeli government has radically changed. And I think we don't talk about this enough. For as horrible as the Israeli government has been for many decades, this occupation of the West Bank, the blockade of Gaza, the constant bombing of innocent, harmless, trapped people, has been going on for decades. There's no way of romanticizing this better time in Israel on the one hand, but on the other, the current composition of the government is filled with people who, even until 5 years ago, were considered completely unthinkable, even within the Israeli context. And so you have a government that's filled with genuinely hateful, genocidal people, sick people who do not view the Palestinians as human, believe explicitly that both the West Bank and Gaza is theirs, part of greater Israel. And it was very much like the way the neocons had long wanted to overthrow Saddam, and then 9/11 became their moment to do it. The people in the Netanyahu government have been waiting for a moment like this. This is what they wanted. They wanted a pretext to be able to say, do you see these are savages? We need to kill them all. And right from the very beginning, Netanyahu said on October 8th, we are going to engage in a war unlike any previously seen. We are going to extract a cost that is unimaginable. Naftali Bennett wrote an essay in The Economist laying out what he thought their motive was, which was to put fear into the hearts of Israeli enemies for generations, so that even though they hate Israel with all of their being, they're so afraid of what Israel will do to them that they'll just meekly acquiesce that there's nothing they can do. And obviously, he said to do that, you have to show the world and your enemies that you don't have any limits, not humanitarian limits, not legal limits, not moral limits on what you're willing to do to entire populations. And you could see it coming, but now to actually watch it unfold, and I think it's so important to note it's not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, on a smaller scale in the West Bank, but what's going on in the West Bank. In many ways, I heard you guys just talking about the killing of people because of their crime of expressing joy that their children have come home. I mean, it's a decree by this occupying force that you are not permitted to engage in public displays of happiness upon seeing your relatives. And if you do, you'll be subject to arrest or killing in a country that doesn't belong to Israel's. It's not even like they're telling their Israeli Arab citizens this. They're telling this to Palestinians who live in the West Bank, that you're barred from celebrating publicly for having your teenage children who never were convicted of any crime released. And so you're not even at a level of savagery and barbarism in terms of the air campaign, in terms of the rate of civilian deaths, the attempt to destroy the healthcare system of Gaza, to destroy all the hospitals, the schools, the mosques, to make Gaza uninhabitable in order to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to drive out the Gazans, to make them need to leave, want to leave to Egypt, to the Sinai, wherever, so that the Israelis can take it over. That is the real purpose of this war.
Now, to your point, Glenn, I'll pass it right to you, CJ. After this point, I'll pass it to you for the next question. There's a reason why I know it's not going to happen, but Biden and anyone who was complicit with approving of this slaughter, arming this slaughter, and giving Israel the AOK to commit the slaughter of thousands of children, they should be held accountable for war crimes. Because during the lead up of this, you had high-ranking Israeli officials describe genocide, describe war crimes. They openly said that they view every single civilian in Gaza as part of Hamas, and they all complicit, and they're going to act accordingly. And as they were saying this stuff, that they're going to hold the civilian population accountable for Hamas, which is essentially a war crime. You had the United States and the corporate media saying Israel had the right to defend himself. So my point of view is that those people are just as complicit, because Israel was 100% clear of what their intentions was going in, and they are executing it. Everyone who repeated the nonsense that Israel was at war with Hamas, they are complicit with genocide. Why are they in the West Bank if they are going to war with Hamas? If you saying that you was a useful idiot for genocide, I apologize. See, I passed you for
No, that was great to add on. I do since you were alluding to or speaking about the topic, bring up your tweet, and this is where I first saw or learned about this agreement, or what was in this agreement, or part of this agreement being no celebration. I'll just read your tweet for those that are listening only. The atrocities in Gaza have received the most attention because of their sheer scale. But what Israel has been doing in the West Bank, that's not Israel's, is next level evil. Forbidding people to celebrate return of family members, then arresting or murdering them if they do. So my question, or what I want you to sort of speak to, is that for this sort of tidbit to come out about what Israel does, like how can they speak about some sort of moral high ground, and also have sort of this sort of policy? So how can they walk that line, and are they being successful walking this line, in your opinion?
Right. So, as you guys know, because we've talked about it before and we've each separately talked about it a lot, I've been a very vocal opponent of the U.S. funding and arming of Ukraine to fight its war. And I've had on my show over the last 18 months many members of Congress, high-profile journalists, activists, presidential candidates who have also been opposed to this war in Ukraine, the U.S. participation in the war in Ukraine, who have been essentially saying, look, the United States has so many problems at home that its own citizens face, that we can't afford to go around the world financing other countries' wars, the wars of foreign countries. And Ukraine's not the 51st American state. This is not our war. Why are we the ones paying for this? Why are we the ones fueling this? Now, most of the people who speak about it that way, not all, there's a lot of left-wing sentiment along those lines, but most people who speak about it just in those terms are people who generally are on the populist right, which is where, as you know, every no vote against Biden's billions of dollars to spend in Ukraine, that's where all the no votes came from, none from the Democratic Party. And then here we have exactly the same thing, which is a new war by a foreign country. And the first thing Joe Biden did, on top of the $4 billion a year we already give to Israel in various forms of aid, is turned around and asked Congress for another $14 billion in just to transfer to Israel to pay for its war. And all these people, not all, but many of them, who have been on my show, who have been out there in public saying we can't afford to finance other countries' wars. We can't and shouldn't go around just pouring out all these billions of dollars to the arms industry and to bomb makers and the like, suddenly have abandoned every single last one of those views, to say nothing of all their fake defense of free speech and opposition to cancel culture, as they've been cheering when people get fired for criticizing Israel, or when entire nations ban protests, or when Ron DeSantis bans pro-Palestinian student groups. Forget that hypocrisy. The hypocrisy on the merits. Suddenly it's all changed. And at first I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe they were emotionally moved by what happened on October 7th, or even they've been inculcated for so long to believe that financing Israel's wars is somehow in the self-defense or national interest of the United States, even though generals and so many American policymakers have long said that many of Israel's actions directly harm American national security, like expansion of settlements, because that's what raises anti-American sentiment. In fact, you know that since the war began in Israel, the State Department on 4 occasions at least have issued travel advisories warning Americans that they face a heightened risk of anti-American violent attacks against them wherever they go in the world. Yep. Which is a very strange thing, to have an American foreign policy that increases the likelihood as an American that you're going to be killed. That does not increase American security. That by definition undermines it.
Absolutely.
But what I have come to realize is that, in kind of being excessively generous, is that for a lot of people standing and applauding what Israel is doing, and also standing and applauding what Joe Biden is doing in financing, and I'm talking about people on the right, the reality is that many of them, not all, there are plenty of Israel supporters who are pained by what Palestinians are going through. I don't want to really paint with too broad of a brush, but there's a significant chunk of people on the right who are supporting all of this because they're the prism through which they see the world is that you have this kind of clash of civilizations. This was something very common after 9/11, where on the one side, you have the elevated, enlightened, superior Western culture, largely composed of white Western populations, white Christian and Jewish populations, the Judeo-Christian ethic, against the primitive, savage, barbaric Muslim hordes. They see immigration in Europe and in parts of the United States as part of this war on civilization, that we need to get these hordes of Muslims out of the West, or at least put them under control. And a lot of them are standing and cheering what Israel is doing, and Biden is paying for it, not because of any geostrategic consideration, but because they just genuinely don't believe that Arabs and Muslims are human or have equality or any humanity worth protecting. And they're happy to see them finally getting their due, finally getting what they deserve. And that tribal, primal sociopathy is a significant factor in what's shaping a lot of this discourse.